Okay, it is 1:15. So as I am continuing to add more people into the room, again, we're just very grateful that you are still here with us, the second day of the conference, and that you are willing and ready to engage into this this panel discussion around the environmental impact on problem gambling behavior. We have our very own Jonathan Crandall, who is going to be the moderator today. And he is going to introduce everybody else and then they'll introduce themselves. But we're just, again, glad that you were here. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and then we'll try to get those questions answered at the end. So take it away, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Leilani. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. I'm excited. This is great. We're at the end of the conference. It's been a great 2 days. And I'm looking at this panel discussion as the capstone, right? This is what it's all about. We have 4 panelists, all of which are in recovery. They're going to share their story, share their hope. And I'm really excited. Thank you so much for everyone to be here. We are at 163 right now. I'm expecting it to go up by at least another 100. So here we go. Again, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Crandall. I'm the Veteran Outreach Coordinator for the New York Council on Problem Gambling. It is absolutely my pleasure to participate and listen to this panel discussion with you today. The topic of today's discussion will be how environmental factors impact problem gambling behavior. Our panel is comprised of 4 people in their own individualized recovery from problem gambling behavior. We'll touch on many aspects of problem gambling, including individual and family member experiences.
Like the spotlight or
whoever's moderating it,
Let me just say this, whoever's talking, you have to mute yourself.
gallery. Oh no.
Once again, if everyone could please mute themselves. So the panel will also discuss how environmental factors can be conducive to problematic gambling
I
behavior.
don't remember because it's been that way. I didn't do it though.
At the end of today's discussion, we hope that you will understand the impacts problem gambling has on the individual and family dynamics, understand how an individual's environment can impact their problem gambling behavior, and how loved ones can first support themselves and then in turn support someone struggling with problem gambling behavior. I'd like to remind you, as we listen to our participants today share their journeys of hope, let us be reminded of the great courage and vulnerability they are demonstrating. So without further ado, I hope everybody is excited as I am. If I may, I'd like to begin introducing everybody, and I will start with the ladies first. And when I call your name, please share your background story so that everybody in the audience can learn a little more about you. So first, I'm going to begin with Kelly. If Kelly could go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi,
share
everybody.
a brief background story of how we got here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly D. I am the wife of a recovering compulsive gambler. I am a stay-at-home mom to 2 beautiful boys, 4 and 7. And I have been in recovery now since May 2nd of 2021. My husband and I have been married for about, almost 10 years now. And I basically just spend my time at home with my family. I'm a homemaker and I'm a returning student trying to further my education.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to have you today. Stephanie, would you please go ahead and unmute yourself and give everybody a background story? Stephanie, can you hear me? Stephanie may be having some difficulty. We'll go ahead and come back to Stephanie. Dave, if you go ahead and share with everybody your background story, and if we can get Stephanie unmuted in the process.
I believe Stephanie is unmuted at this point.
All right. We'll go ahead and begin with Stephanie.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a compulsive gambler in recovery since October 28th, 2018. And my journey started when I was a child and I was exposed from my parents and my grandparents with scratch offs and then weekend vacations at a casino. And it continued and escalated after I tore my ACL. And it went through my college years, and then I got a felony conviction because I had used credit cards to max out and get cash advances. And then I had to do weekends in county jail, and then I'm on probation, which is almost halfway done. And I went to an inpatient recovery facility, Williamsville Wellness in Virginia. So here I am now working in the recovery field as a peer advocate.
Giving it back. That's a great story, Stephanie. Thank you very much. We're all looking forward to hearing more from Kelly and yourself. Dave, were you able to get unmuted?
I was, yeah. Thanks,
Hi.
Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm Dave. I am an 11-year veteran of the United States Army. I actually fell into my gambling addiction while I was on active duty and stationed in the Republic of Korea. It was right after 9/11. I got over there. I was stressed. I had been fighting with my ex-wife. I had 2 young kids at home that I couldn't bring with me. Found myself over there in Korea, and I got into the hotel on the main base in Seoul and found a casino style slot room right there on the base, which up to that point I hadn't really had an issue with, but I guess perfect storm, given all the stress I was under and everything that was happening. I made probably the biggest mistake a compulsive gambler can make. I won money. And in that moment when I won, I can remember just feeling like all that stress, all that pain, all of that stuff that was happening just went away. Long story short, that continued to get worse over the next few years to the point where I lost rank twice. I was actually let out of the Army because of it. Borrowed money from my own subordinates, stole from my own unit, got let out of the Army, and it did not stop after I was let out of the Army till finally the point I sought treatment. And in 2007, I went to the VA's gambling treatment program in Cleveland. A remarkable program. Got treatment, was doing well, but didn't stay connected with my recovery. So I actually fell back into my addiction and relapsed in January of 2020 is my date when I decided to step back into recovery, went back through the program in Cleveland, and have been involved ever since, to the point where I now, I do meetings regularly. I have online meetings. I go to Gamblers Anonymous on a regular basis. I work part-time as a addiction therapist, and have actually been able to get a gambling program, a small one, but a gambling program into our drug and alcohol center. And then I also advocate whenever I possibly can for better treatment for service members with gambling issues. And then I have my own podcast, which deals with problem gambling and the military.
Dave, you have a wonderful story. I'm proud of the service that you've done, and I'm proud of the service that you continue to do for our community. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, bringing up the train, Steve.
Everyone, I'm Steve D. I'm a recovering problem gambler. My last date of bet was 5/2/21. I started gambling compulsively or problematically in 2017, but I have had other addictions in my past. I've been clean since July of 2009. I used to be a cocaine and heroin user, but I entered into a Narcotics Anonymous program at that point. So I've been clean for close to 13 years now, but because I never, dove into the problems. In the past, I would look at it kind of like, I need to just stop and, kind of get past, stop using the drugs, stop the behaviors, and then I'd be okay. I never really took recovery seriously. I never did any one-on-one therapy. And that's kind of what happened this first time around in 2017 also. So I stayed clean, but in those years, I basically was just abstaining. So when these triggers arised again, which we'll talk about as we get further into this, I ended up going into gambling in 2017. My wife, Kelly, caught it the first time in 2018, and I kind of treated it the same way. Just stop, let's get past it and try to forget about it. Didn't want to identify as an addict. But this time around, the big difference for me was just realizing these past patterns and behaviors, realizing that this wasn't going to work. So when things came to a head again in May of 2021, that's when I really dove into therapy and a lot of other things that we'll talk about. But yeah, I've been bet free since 5/2/21. I've done multiple articles on problem gambling and recovery. We were featured in the New York Times and in the Daily Gazette around here. And I also do a podcast on problem gambling recovery and just recovery from addiction in general, because to me, there are subtle differences. There are differences to gambling addiction, but addiction is addiction to me, regardless if it's gambling, drug addiction, alcohol. So yeah, that's what I got for now, and looking forward to the rest of this. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. Your brutal honesty is admirable. I applaud you for that. And your story just shows how one can go from substance use disorder to gambling addiction. We have so much to learn from you, and I'm so excited to jump into these questions. Dave, if I can start with you first, and this question is going to follow on to the rest of the panelists. But Dave, we'll begin with you. How did the military environment or the military culture affect your gambling behavior?
All right, here we are. Sorry about that.
I apologize, Dave.
Great question, Jonathan. There's a couple of ways that the military lifestyle and culture kind of lends itself to problematic gambling. First and foremost, it's the job. The job can be very stressful. We train for battle. That's basically what you're training for. No matter what your field is, your entire structure around training is to be prepared in the event of war. So what you're taught to do is we're taught to more or less compartmentalize our feelings, because we have to rely and back up on our training to be able to drive on with the mission to get the mission done. Part of the issue with that is, while it's necessary, in order to get the job done, what's happening is, as we are going through traumatic events or stress or whatever it is, we're not processing those in the moment. So that kind of has to come out somewhere. For some people, unfortunately, it's alcohol or drugs. For me, it was gambling. So that's part of it. And I can tell you that the stress that I was under when I got into Korea played directly into that. I was under a tremendous amount of stress, and I can't tell you the relief I felt when I sat in that room and I was gambling. So that's part one. Part two, the lifestyle itself, there's a lot more downtime than people realize in the military, waiting for transport, waiting for training. It's not constantly running around and crawling through foxholes and things like that. So during those downtimes, for years and years and years, basically since the military has been around, gambling has been part of that culture, within the military, to fill some of that dead time, to promote some of that camaraderie and things like that. So, unfortunately for someone like me, that's not a good thing, because, you get caught up in that, while you're waiting, poker game or whatever it happens to be, can very easily get caught up in that addiction. So from a standpoint of a lifestyle, the lifestyle in and of itself kind of promotes, gambling as a way to fill time, if you will. I'll fast forward to today. Now you're adding even another element that if somebody's got their phone with them, it's unlimited at this point.
It is certainly scary, Dave. jumping over to Stephanie, what did your environment look like? How did that affect your gambling behavior? If you could share that with the audience, give us a visual of your environment.
Okay. So my environment, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York that didn't have much around. I grew up, playing sports in high school, and you had to drive 20 to 30 minutes to participate in activities or go to social events. And there wasn't much available to me other than my parents taking me to events, my mom particularly driving me all over the New York State to play soccer, basketball, or softball. And then our outings as a family went to a casino and, played in the arcade with my dad. And that's how it all stemmed. And it's a big isolation factor for me.
It's interesting. Although Dave, coming from a military background, military environment, and then Stephanie, a civilian environment, there's many similarities. What I'm hearing from both of you is you're utilizing it, one, to cope with isolation, stress, and just things to do, right? So I'm going to jump over to Kelly and Steve, and hopefully you both can just kind of answer it, together. Steve, what did the environment, look like for you? And Kelly, what was your viewpoint from, as a loved one, as a spouse?
I would say for my environment, it was, there were two major things that kind of set me off into my compulsive gambling. I was a daily fantasy sports player. I only played DraftKings, FanDuel, stuff like that. So for years, I feel like I almost kind of I don't want to say set myself into it, but it was like a gradual process where I would play the free fantasy online with the ESPN, and then I played season-long stuff with my best friends. So the first environment, I guess, that really drove me into this gambling to chase this big prize, which I thought it was just for the money. We moved into my parents' house. We lived on Long Island before we moved upstate. And in 2017, when we kind of realized that it was just going to be too expensive to live there, we realized it wasn't going to work. We were going to have to leave Long Island. We were going to have to leave everything behind. Plus, just living at my parents' house was just kind of difficult. So I thought I had all this knowledge of sport because I had always done well in my season longs, and I knew a lot about sports. So I just decided I was going to try to play FanDuel and try to surprise Kelly with this large amount of money. I thought I was going to win. And I thought it was just about the money, but, digging deep into it, it was really about these inadequacies I've always had in my life and feeling like I just was never enough for my family. So I just thought I needed this money. That's what I thought initially. But anyway, so the environment, I was just living at my parents' house. While we were living there, Kelly caught me the first time, and I stopped. And I stopped for about a year. We ended up moving up here to the Saratoga region, and we were just kind of preoccupied buying a home, so I didn't gamble at that point. But once we got into our home, that was the big thing that really triggered me again. We'd saved for so long, and we finally got into this house, this beautiful home that we own now. But when we got in here, I felt like, again, we had almost no money left, and that really triggered me into just this worry of thinking, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to have enough? So it was, again, it was coming into this home basically. And we were up here kind of isolated, like Dave and Stephanie said. When we moved up here, we had no one. It was not we had no one up here. So it was just us. So everything, at least financially, felt like it was almost crushing. We had this massive expense now with this mortgage that it was just more than I thought it was going to be. And that's the environment that kind of led me into my gambling.
Now, real quick before I jump to Kelly, I heard you say you started with fantasy sports, and it was a form of escape, form of wanting to surprise Kelly with a sum of money, almost like winning a big job, and you felt that with sports betting or fantasy sports, you're almost an expert. Now, playing into mobile sports betting, do you see a certain culture? Is there a culture to mobile sports betting or fantasy sports that maybe differs from, say, casino play or scratch off?
I think the one big difference in this, and I mean, obviously gambling is gambling no matter what, but at least from my perspective, I mean, I always saw casino gambling and scratch cards and playing slots and cards. It's like, that's just gambling. Like it felt like almost the analogy of like, if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water, he jumps out. But if you put him in a lukewarm water and you just slowly bring the heat up, he burns without realizing it. That's what it felt like. By slowly over the years playing free and then season long, the jump from one to the daily fantasy it was a very gray area. And I'd say that I feel like there's going to be this huge explosion of people like me with the sports betting, because it's being so normalized right now with all the ads and with the bombardment of everything right now, especially in New York and other states. I know people I talk to in my groups, there's large chat groups. A lot of people are talking, with their friends about their picks in the daily fantasy, and there's stuff all over ESPN about betting on sports now. So it's just become a very normalized thing in our culture. So that's why to me, it seems it's not different in my eyes, but I could see how it would be easier to fall into that. I could be wrong, but that's from my perspective.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing I just want to point out is just how awesome it is to see you two sitting next to one another, mutually supporting each other in recovery together. It's just amazing. It's beautiful. I just had to say that. Thank you. Kelly, from a loved one's perspective, from a spouse's perspective, how did the environment play into it? What was your viewpoint?
Well, the first time around, I had no idea anything was happening, the months, days, whatever, leading up to it. I pretty much found out by chance. It was just because we were looking into buying a house, so we had to look into Steve's credit and things like that. So the first time I found out about it, I was kind of just hit in the face, but I really wasn't ready to take that on just because I had so many other distractions. Like in my eyes, we were so focused on moving upstate, moving out of Steve's parents' house. So I really wasn't ready to deal with what was happening there. So my response to that was basically just stop what you're doing, let's move on from this. And, that was it. But this time around, it was different. I noticed that Steve was under a lot of stress. He wasn't sleeping well. I noticed that he was more irritable. He wasn't really himself. He wasn't the man that I married 10 years ago. So, but I never thought in a million years it was because of gambling. I didn't know what was going on. I noticed that he was on his phone a lot. I noticed that he was distant, with me, with the kids. It was always as if he was not present. But again, I just happened to find out about the gambling by chance. I was upgrading his phone and I had to log into his email, and then I saw these different emails pop up that I questioned. And now this time around, it was different because, especially after finding out 3 years ago about the gambling, I'm like, okay, obviously there's a problem, because back then I basically just told him that if he were to do this again, that's it. I would take the kids, I would leave, and then our marriage would be over. So this time around, at first it was so hard for me to grasp that, because I threatened everything. And still in my eyes, at first I was like, obviously that wasn't enough. So it took some time to get, to get over and stuff like that. But the environment surrounded by him was very different. I mean, like I said, he was not who I married. I married someone that was positive, that was, back then he was recovering from his past addictions. He was about 10 months into his recovery, and then him and I met. So he was kind of still on that recovery high when I met him. But then looking back at the months of before I found out the second time around, it was just, he was totally different. He was not who I once knew him to be. So it was a completely different environment.
Thank you for sharing it. And those of us that are in the field and have experienced this, hearing Kelly speak, you can immediately identify the warning signs, right? It's easy to say looking back on it, but those warning signs, key to pay attention to. Kelly, this goes into our next question. You touched base on it briefly, but I just wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to add. What are the impacts? You mentioned his demeanor, his distance. What are the impacts seen from a loved one's perspective?
And there were the financial impacts of it all. That was kind of hard to grasp how much money had been lost. But it was also, like I mentioned, I mean, the dynamic that we had with our kids, you know, he seemed very irritable with our children. You know, and it trickles down. It's putting stress on me, obviously, because I just felt like he was so stressed out financially because, of course, he has the weight of the world on his shoulders and there's nothing I could do at this point to help because I have to stay home with our kids and I can't really work right now. So, you know, just the effects of that. And then plus I would be stressed out as well because we just moved into our house and now we have to worry about fixing all these different things. So I was feeling the financial burden of that also. But again, I never thought that he was gambling. I didn't realize where all of his stress was coming from. I just basically thought it was just the same as my stress, but you know, obviously he's the one out there working, so he's just feeling more of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. We'll work our way back to Stephanie. After, finding recovery and speaking to your loved ones, can you share how that impacted them? Go ahead and ask you to unmute. I apologize that you keep getting muted. There we go.
Yeah, so between my mom and my best friend, who is my significant other also, they were both impacted significantly. My mom, they both had an idea, but my boyfriend, he didn't like the casino to begin with because of his history with his own dad. But then also he didn't like going with, spending all the time at the casino. And so he would do it just to be with me. And then when I would get there, I would be in a tunnel vision. So it was like he wasn't even with me because I wasn't the same person. And so then the trust came that, I would say I was going shopping, but I really was going to a casino. And then our communication just broke down also. So it affected many aspects between my relationship with my mom and coworkers too, but also my boyfriend.
Thank you, Dave. I know you're a family man. From a loved one's perspective, how did you impact them?
Yeah. Well, I lost a marriage over it. The first time I fell into my addiction, it caused my first wife to separate from me. I had 2 young children at the time. I was distant. And she kept saying, there's something different about you. I don't know what it is, but there's something different because I hid it. I hid it masterfully, I guess, like a lot of us do in this addiction. She never knew what was really going on until I finally came clean with it. Well, it drove us to a separation because she just was not ready to deal with that with 2 young children and to deal with me and the things I was going through. I lost contact with my children for 2 years when they were young. And that still hurts me to this day. Now we're on very good terms now. We have a great relationship now, but I basically shut down. I was so ashamed and embarrassed and, everything else from what I was doing that I just did not even talk. If somebody would ask how I was doing, no matter how bad I looked, I would say I'm good. And that was it. I would not go into any more detail. Fast forward to the second time around, to the more recent time, I married the woman who was my high school sweetheart many years ago, and we had a phenomenal relationship. And this one was hard because she trusted me implicitly. If I said something, it was true to her. But she could tell, she told me near the end, before I confessed to her what was going on, she could see the irritability, she could see the isolation, she could see the separation starting to happen, where I wasn't talking as much. And when I finally did come clean to her, I basically blew her out of the water because she had no clue I was doing what I was doing. And basically I lost all of the trust that she had in me, and trust and honesty are two of her biggest things. We're still 2.5 years later, we're still rebuilding that trust. I mean, and it's work, but it's good work. Don't misunderstand me. It's good work and it's work that needs to happen, but she's still, when I say something, there's still that look of, now I don't know what to believe. So, I basically just tore the trust out of my relationship. I blew it out of the water, and with all the lies, the deceit, the manipulation that I did.
And that you answered this next question. I just want to see if there's anything else that you might want to add. How did you notice your behavior was affecting your family? Obviously, they noticed it, right? They called you out on it and said, hey, you're different. No matter what, you were hiding it. And then of course the divorce. But is there anything else that you can add? How you began to notice that that they were catching on?
I don't know that they ever really caught on until I said something, but no, I mean, I think more or less just you could see subtle changes in my personality, where I was most of the time agreeable and I would go along, and I might have some comments here and there, but was always pretty much on board with what was happening. All of a sudden now I was disagreeing with things. They would want to go places and I'd be like, nope, I don't want to go. I'm good. My wife wanted to go to Houston because her son was down there. My stepson was down there, and I probably could have gone with her, but I did everything I could to get away from going with her. And I think she noticed that. So that's probably the biggest things. They were, in the whole grand scheme of things, they were probably subtle, but if you look back on it now, it was very noticeable.
Going back to Kelly and Steve real quick. One thing I'd like to ask Kelly, you had mentioned that, you had no idea that it was gambling. And it may have been when you had said earlier that you were, had to access some of his emails, but what was the culminating event? When did you find out that it was gambling? Was it Steve telling you, or when did you find out? How did you find out?
So pretty much, I had to play the investigator. So after going through the emails, I kind of knew something because back 3 years ago, I had seen on a statement charges from DraftKings. So this time around, I believe, or was it FanDuel? FanDuel first. And then, so in the emails now, I saw a bunch of things from DraftKings. So once again, I have no idea. I don't do sports or anything like that. So I just noticed all these different emails. So then I ended up downloading the app, and then I used his email to get the credentials. And then that's when I saw all these different credit cards and all these different charges. And that's basically where it came to a head. So then I was at my mother-in-law's house, actually, when I was finding all this stuff out as well. So, of course, I'm asking her, what is this? Because in my brain, the worst case scenario back before I knew it was gambling was he's got to be cheating on me because I know he's hiding something. So what else could it possibly be? It's got to be cheating, right? So, so after seeing all these charges, all these credit cards and everything, I called him while he was at work and I said, what is this? What am I looking at right now? So he said nothing to me. He did not know how to respond to that. So I said, okay, well, when you could figure out what you want to tell me, you can call me back. And I didn't hear from him for the rest of the day. So upon finding everything out, I honestly just thought that was it. I thought that my marriage was over. I thought that everything we worked for, everything was done. But yeah, it was pretty much just doing all the investigating, the hunting down, what's DraftKings, what is this, what are these credit cards, stuff like that.
Thank you. Steve, this may lead into our next question, which is, when did you decide to seek help? But how did you notice your behavior was affecting your family? Was that part of your decision to seek help, or can you tell us some more about that?
They're kind of two different things. So I'll go into how it was affecting my family first. So a few things I can remember back to, like, especially because everything was on the phone for me. I would just always constantly have my phone with me. I literally bring it in the shower with me sometimes. And there would be times I'd be with my kids and I can remember multiple times of them just saying, Dad, no phone, Dad, no phone, put the phone down, put the phone down. And I can proudly say they haven't said that to me one time since I've stopped gambling. I realized, like, I only had my phone with me constantly because I was either setting up lineups, looking at the, who was playing that night, looking at, how the scores were doing, who was doing well, was James Harden going to hit that next three? Like that's the kind of stuff like I would constantly be checking. And my kids would always be telling me, Dad, no more phone. Like, so that's one thing I would notice. The last day that I gambled, I can remember we were at my brother-in-law's house. We were down there for I think it was
Family get together.
yeah, it was just a family get together. It doesn't matter. So there was a big party going on, and I don't feel like I wasn't really, I can't even remember one interaction I had that day. I was in and out of the bathroom constantly. And even if I wasn't in the bathroom, I was on my phone, and really had no meaningful conversations. And then the whole ride home, it's like a 4.5, 5 hour ride home from there. I sat on my phone the whole time, and I don't think we spoke much the whole time. So I was really disconnected. And even if it wasn't building lineups or, looking at score, all the stuff that goes along with daily fantasy, if that wasn't going on, I still would have a hard time talking about anything meaningful with my wife, especially over the last year, because it had gotten so bad. It had gotten well past the point of trying to win the sum of money. It had gotten to the point where I was so far into it, where I'd taken so much from my 401k that I just kept telling myself, I have got to win this back. So I just was living in stress. I mean, I work 12 to 16 hours a day at my job as a truck driver. And there were some days I was so stressed I couldn't sleep, and I'd go to work with no sleep, and it's a nightmare. I mean, it just affected me in so many ways. I wasn't myself. So in seeking recovery, I tried many different things to stop beforehand, because I kept feeling like if I didn't fix this myself, that the world was going to come crashing down. I was going to lose Kelly. I was going to lose our kids. I was going to lose our life and family. I need to fix this. At least that's what I thought at first. And everything I did to try to fix it by, self-excluding from FanDuel or setting limitations on DraftKings, and several other things I tried just never worked. And so when I got caught that day, when Kelly was talking about that phone call, I couldn't think of what to say, because I just couldn't. It's almost like I just didn't want to keep it up anymore. I hate to say, like, it just felt like it was like, whatever happens from this point on, it's like, at least this weight is off. Like, I don't have this lie anymore. Like, it's going to suck no matter what's going to, like, it's like, you just have to like crawl through the I don't know, a good analogy here, all the garbage, the whatever you want to call it.
You got to go through it, not around it, right?
Yeah, I just, yeah, exactly. You got to go through it, not around it. And I just felt like I'm just so tired of feeling like this. And it took some time, like we went to my first GA meeting that Friday. This was on a Monday. And I just was so tired of holding everything in. It wasn't even just about the addiction. It was just how I felt about myself for years. It just like all just came pouring out, like of not feeling good enough about myself and feeling like I just wasn't, like, I just couldn't love who I was no matter what. And it started out with podcasting. There's some great podcasts I found, all in the Addicted Gamblers podcast. And that's where I started the After Gambling podcast. That's where I began my recovery stuff. Then I started going to some GA meetings, and then got into a problem gambling support group meeting that I still go to this day. And that's where it started. I took this seriously this time around because I just was so tired of feeling this way. I didn't want to be this person anymore. And I knew if I was ever going to rebuild anything with Kelly and the kids, like, this is what I needed to do. And it may have started off where, like, I didn't want to feel that way anymore, and I wanted to rebuild relationships and trust. But now it's still for that, but I don't ever want to feel that way again. So for me, the way I don't go back to that, even that negative self-talk, is through what I do now: recovery, meetings, therapy, podcasting, all that.
Steve, I just have to mention, hearing you talk about that process, the culminating events, I could see the stress, I could see the weight on your shoulders. But as you talked about the process and how, you decided to come out of it, I could see your shoulders slowly start to relax, and I can just see the pressure relief. I'm so happy that you're here with us today and that you're in the position that you're in. There's some really great questions in the chat box that I really want to get to. I just have a couple more questions to ask. Stephanie, I just wanted to ask, how did you notice that, your behavior was affecting your family? And was this part of what made you decide to seek help? And if not, can you just talk about what made you decide to seek help?
Yeah, so when Tim and I would go to the casino, he would beg to leave and we would get into some serious fights and arguments inside the casino. And I would tell him, just leave, I'll find a way home. And he would be like, no, I'm not leaving you here, let's go. And then he thought he was trying to help by what he called the vault and putting the winnings in there and then give back what was the original quote unquote free play, is what would be my bait to go in. And from there, you know, lies. I would tell him one thing, I would tell my mom another thing, but then I would get caught in those lies. And then it was like, what do I do next? But the turning point for me to seek help with that was until we were in Punta Cana and my dad had hit a jackpot and I was like, oh my God, that's not even a quarter of what, you know, like what he won isn't even what he lost. It's not even going to ever get back to that amount. And I was like, well, here I am in my 30s. I can either make a change or I could end up in that same situation. And then we came back and we went to the casino for my mom's birthday. And I just felt like this was it. I had won and then I lost everything. And I was suicidal. I didn't want to continue going. And I came home that night and couldn't sleep and woke up the next morning and said to Tim, I need help. I need to get the help of getting rid of this addiction. And so that's when we went to the Center for Problem Gambling in Albany, which was an hour away because that was the only service for gambling for me. And both my mom and Tim got enrolled and started getting help attending groups. But in the mix of that, that's when I attended Williamsville for 4 weeks to get inpatient services. And it broke down everything that was stuck inside of me that I couldn't even let out until I took that first step into recovery.
Thank you for sharing that. That must have been a very profound moment to see that jackpot strike and then think to yourself, it's not even a dent in what I've lost.
Well,
Yeah.
that was my dad. It wasn't even my winnings. I
Right.
wasn't even there, so I didn't even see it, which, you know, it's just hearing about it.
Absolutely. That had to be something that's obviously stuck with you for life, right? That was a life-changing moment. I'm glad that
Absolutely.
you had that. And that just had to be life-changing. Dave, what drove you to find recovery?
To be honest with you, I hear some of the stories. And first of all, Steve, when you talked about when you reached that point of no return, when you just gave in, I really felt that. I just want to be honest with you. I felt that when you said that because I kind of went through something similar for myself. But to back up just a little bit, to be honest with you, when I was in the throes of my addiction, if I'm being brutally honest, even if my family had noticed, I didn't care. Did it mean something to me inside? Yes, it did. Did I feel the shame and the guilt of what I was doing? Yes, I did. Did it matter? No, because all I wanted to do was do what I was doing. I wanted to gamble. I wanted to keep doing it. And I didn't want anybody to tell me not to do it anymore because I was so intensely locked into it that I was not in a place where I wanted to be pulled out of it because I knew I would have to deal with reality. And I just was not ready to deal with reality. So fast forward, my addiction reached a point where when I was engaged in my addiction, I didn't care anymore. It didn't mean anything to me anymore. I could be sitting, and one of my biggest things was slot machines. I could be sitting in front of a slot machine. And this story, by the way, is not terribly unusual, but I remember it for myself. Sitting in front of a slot machine, I can't wait until I run out of money, but I won't leave until I run out of money. So, you know, that sort of twisted thinking of I'm not there to win anymore. If I had won, I would have actually been disappointed. I was actually waiting to lose all my money, but I would not get up and walk out with a little bit of money I had left. I had to stay there until it was all gone. That was the point I had reached, you know, until it finally reached a point. And I can talk about, you know, at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I can remember January 3rd, it was a Friday. I sat down on my couch and wrapped a blanket around myself, and I told my wife I was sick because she still didn't know what was going on. And during that weekend, during that Saturday and Sunday, I made the decision whether I wanted to get into recovery and be the person I knew that I could be, or whether I wanted an exit plan. And to be honest with you, had I decided the other way, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. That's how resolved I was on either side. There's actually a funny story that goes with this that I think, Jonathan, you've heard before, which is as I'm sitting there during that weekend, I hear Morgan Freeman's voice from Shawshank Redemption saying, "Get busy living or get busy dying." I say funny, it wasn't really that funny for me. It was actually a pivotal moment in my life because I made a choice in that moment to live. And at that moment, I felt that sense of resolve and I felt that weight coming off, that I knew that I was about to walk into a storm when I said something to my wife and my family about everything that I'd done. I knew I was stepping into a dark place. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to find all my stuff on the front porch. I didn't know what to expect, but it didn't matter. I just felt that weight relief of knowing that I was stepping into and giving this thing up and I was ready to put it behind me.
Thank you, Dave. And I know for a fact that since I've known you, you've been getting busy living. I know that for a fact. So we are grateful and glad that you're here with us today. Real quick, I'm gonna jump in the chat box and ask some questions, and then we'll go with the last question of what drives your recovery and where you can share some tips, tricks, suggestions, resources, state your podcast again, and tell everybody what's been working for you. So in the chat box, okay. Steve, do you think your problem gambling became more intense when your substance use subsided?
Well, I never did one of the, they were so far apart from one another. You know, I was a drug addict from like 13 until 25, essentially. I mean, I had clean periods where I'd stop for a year and a half, but I've been clean since I was 25, and I didn't start problematically gambling like until 2017. So, I can't give a good answer to that because they weren't close enough to tell you, you know, one way or the other.
Do you see, real quick, do you see similarities between the two? As far as, you know, the drive to use or the drive to gamble, do you think they're parallel with one another?
So one thing I've really come to realize with the multiple addictions I've had is they make you feel differently in different ways. Cocaine makes you feel different than heroin, and heroin makes you feel different than gambling. But one thing I've noticed is once I'm addicted to it, once I'm in it, I want to stop. Everything in me is telling me to stop. I know for sure, like, this is either going to kill me or destroy me. Everything in me is telling me, you cannot do this anymore. I tell myself over and over again, stop. This is the last shot. This is the last lineup. Doesn't matter. And I just still had this inability to stop. Like, no matter how badly I wanted to stop, I just couldn't. And even though there's for me, I didn't feel any physical withdrawals from gambling. I think maybe just the shock and just everything that had happened was so devastating. Just the thought of potentially losing my family. I'm one of the fortunate ones, I guess. I've never had an urge to gamble since then. With drug use, I would have withdrawals from like opiates. I didn't have that from cocaine or marijuana or something like that. But that there are differences in them, but to me, it's like it's hitting the same dopamine receptors. It's still, you're getting that, either the rush from the drug or the rush from the, first it was for the rush from winning, then it was just the potential of the winning, just this setting of the lineup, just the building of the lineup. And that's what I've learned as I've come into this. There may be different things, maybe different substances or behaviors, but this inability to want to stop when everything is telling me not to stop and my life is falling apart around me, that's where I find the similarities in every addiction.
Thank you. For all the panelists, has there been any panelists here that's used medication assisted treatment for problem gambling behavior?
I have not, Jonathan.
Okay. Stephanie has not. Okay.
I have not.
Okay. Now, those of you that have children, which I think might be all of you, have you educated and discussed this with your children?
Yeah, I have. I mean, my children are all adults now, but I can remember having a conversation with my kids when they were younger, when they first started asking about, when I had first reconnected with my kids after years of not seeing them, they started asking questions about what was wrong with me. Why was I away? What was happening to me? And they were young at the time. My goodness, they had to be, 10 and 8 or somewhere around there. And it was hard to explain in a way that they could understand, but I was able to get them to understand that, yes, I deal with an addiction. I deal with something that's a disease, basically. And I told them some of the things that I had done. I didn't go into graphic detail, but I told them some of the things I had done. And they were grateful that I answered their questions so honestly. When I fell into my relapse, my daughter in particular, my oldest, she was she was very disappointed, but she was also very critical, and she was very much one of my guideposts into getting into recovery, because she came right to me and said, listen, I understand what you're going through. I'm here for you, but this is not going to happen again, and I'm going to help you get through it. So she actually has been one of my pillars as I'm in my recovery.
Steve or Kelly?
We can do the answer for the kids quick. I just wanted to say quick with your question before. I was on a medication called Suboxone for about a year when I got clean off of heroin, and I attempted to try to use it at a low dose for my gambling because it worked well for my cravings for that, and it felt like it worked for a little while when I was trying to stop gambling. But I would not suggest using that because it has a horrible withdrawal coming off that too. But sorry, you can talk about the kids.
As far as with explaining to our kids, kind of like what Dave said, our kids are very young. They're 4 and 7 right now, so they really don't understand what's going on. They knew something was happening, especially when in those first couple of days, they definitely knew because everything in the house was not right. But we don't try to hide it right now. Like, they know that we both go to therapy. We always tell them that we go to therapy to talk about our feelings. And when we're doing our meetings, they're in earshot. We're not trying to hide this from them. We want them to know that this is real. And, we want them to know that, especially when they get older, we want them to feel comfortable enough to come to us if they ever struggle with their own addictions. I actually come from a family, my father had his own addictions, but it was never explained to me. So I feel like, I think it's something very important that we should explain to our children. I don't know if I would have done anything differently had I have known more about addiction, but I just think it's so important to educate. And, we don't hide anything from our children. If they have any questions, we're very open, and, we feel like it's very important for them to understand one day.
I personally agree with you guys. I think it's very important. What advice would you give to us working in the field of problem gambling? What things should we consider?
I'm going to just jump in just for a second. I think one of the biggest things in dealing with people who are struggling with problem gambling is making sure that you understand their relationship with money. Make sure that they understand what the roadblocks are that are out there that can help them, whether that be, somebody to watch your money for you, whether that be self-exclusion, understand all those things that are available in terms of roadblocks. But also understand the need to hide. For me, if somebody had kind of tapped early into my need to hide things from people, I might not have jumped back into my addiction. So that's just what's coming up for me.
Stephanie?
Yeah, so working in the substance abuse area now as a peer advocate, I see it coming from a dual addiction. Like, they're getting off of the drug addiction, but now they're turning to something else. And a lot of it is the mobile sports betting. They come in talking about it all the time. Like, hey, did you see who won this weekend? I made X amount of money. And it's interesting to see, like when they do an assessment here, At the clinic, they screen and the question is, do you have a problem with gambling? It's just yes or no. There's no further discussion of it. And so it is very eye-opening to see how it goes pushed under the rug.
So
But
the
my
importance-
recommendation would just be to pull, just to ask questions, be understanding and know that it's not easy to open up.
Absolutely. So further screening, and then also, I know one thing that we suggest is sometimes those questions can be kind of stigmatizing or almost in your face. So be more, I guess when you're working with your client to listen, really, right, and understand, like what Dave said, the relationship with money, and listen to those key, warning signs or indicators. Is that kind of what you're saying, Stephanie? Is to really just
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just have a casual conversation. You don't need to be direct and say, do you gamble? What do you do for leisure?
Yeah, and Jonathan, if I can just bounce off that for a second, you can even extend that out further and say, what do you do for leisure? And if they bring up to the casino or online gambling or whatever, you can start asking some very general questions like, hey, have you noticed that increase at all over the past few months? Have you noticed that you're spending a little bit more money doing it? It's a little hard to kind of keep it to yourself. Do you want to kind of keep it to yourself? I mean, there's ways to get those questions in, without just saying, because I deal with the same thing at the treatment facility. The intake that we have just has one question. Do you have a problem with gambling, or have you gambled? And when somebody's coming in for drugs and alcohol, it's very easy for them to shrug that off, but it's important to know it, because stepping into that, it's addiction. It's addiction and co-occurring addiction, or, that we want to attack that as best we can, even though primarily they might be going after drugs or alcohol. We want to take care of it, try to at least step into that lane in gambling at the same time a little bit.
Absolutely, and make individuals aware that they can go from one addiction to another, right? Stephanie, I think I heard you say also, for those of us in the field, to remain up to date on current trends, right? You mentioned people coming in and talking about mobile sports betting. So just making sure we're current with what's going on. Is that what you would say?
Yes, absolutely.
Steve, this question, this came up earlier, and I've been wanting to ask you, can you still enjoy sports without the gambling piece?
I know this is going to be different for everybody, and I was actually going to mention this. I don't watch sports at all anymore. I know that may be difficult for some people who are really into sports. I mean, I loved sports for most of my life. I was a big Mets, Jets, and Knicks fan, but for me, like, the most important thing for me is this recovery and getting better. So cutting sports out just had to happen. I'm not saying that in the future I may never be able to watch sports again, but I talk about it a lot. I just don't pay attention at all. I didn't know who was in the Super Bowl this year. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I have no idea how the Mets did this year. I have no idea how the teams I've loved for my life have done this year, because even if I feel comfortable, like, I could probably watch a game right now and be fine. But to me, it's just that first, like, dipping of the toe in the water, and I'm not ready to risk that. Like, I'm not ready to, like, I mentioned to Kelly, like, probably like 5 months into my recovery, I was delivering at a customer, and it was the beginning of the NFL season, and I was waiting for the guy to check the order in, and I just glanced up, and it was a sports bar, so I'm seeing all the TV screens, and I saw the stats going across the bottom, and I can't remember who the running back was or whatever, or if it was even a running back, but I saw the stats where it said like 103 yards and a touchdown. And like, the first thing that came across my mind was that's 19.3 points, because he got 103 yards. So that's 100.3. He got 6 points for the touchdown and an extra 3, because on DraftKings, that's an extra 3 points if you go over 100. So that was just where my mind went immediately. And that made me uncomfortable, which also solidified this thing in my mind where I was like, okay, this is, an example of why I can't watch it, even though it did not make me want to gamble. It didn't trigger me. It didn't give me any urges. To me, it's like I said, you're dipping your toe in that water. And if you're okay with that, you're okay with the next step. And I don't even want to head in that direction. So for me, I don't watch sports at all.
I love how you're going into it without absolutes either. You're saying, maybe down the road I may, but right now I'm not, period. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. There's still more questions in the chat that I wish I could get to. I wish we could have covered more tips, tricks, and suggestions. One thing I want to say is thank you so much for coming here today, sharing your story, being vulnerable with everybody. It took a lot of courage. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I know I did. I can't express it enough. Thank you very much for being a part of this panel. Thank you to everyone that listened in. I hope that you got as much out of it as I did. Leilani, is there any closing remarks that you'd like to cover?
Same. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your story. Sharing stories is therapeutic, but sharing stories can be hard. So I thank you for your willingness to be open and direct and honest. Truth is power. So I really, truly thank you. I just want to let everybody know, please, our rally is up next at 2:30. Please join us as we get hyped and energetic about truly shining a light on problem gambling and truly shining a light on these wonderful people who are going through this, whether it's the problem gambler or it's the loved one who is struggling right alongside the person. So let's get out here and bring more excitement, bring more energy to this field of addiction. And I agree with Stephen D, and I say it in all the trainings, addiction is an addiction. So we thank you for joining with us for these from yesterday, today, and being present. Present is important, but be present with us at the next rally. I put the link in the chat. I will put the link again in the chat just in case it got lost in translation. But please join us. And thank you again. All right. Oh, and I'm sorry, somebody had asked, can you put your podcast in the info? But I think we'll try to add the podcast to the website and all when Jamie will figure that
Absolutely.
out.
If somebody wants to save the chat right now, I know that Dave's podcast and Steve's podcast were shared earlier, but we'll be sure to put that within the conference materials. Absolutely. A link to both of their podcasts.
Awesome. So that is all, folks. I gotta get ready to get my life together for this rally. So long.